All right, let's jump right in. Imagine one of the world's biggest, most powerful empires, just shattering, like glass. Well, that's exactly what went down in 18th century India. Today, we're going to dive into the chaos, the constant fighting, and the brand new powers that clawed their way up from the ruins of the mighty Mughal Empire.
So, what really happens when a huge single power holding everything together just disappears? It's never a gentle, quiet decline. Nope. It's usually a violent explosion, a political earthquake that completely redraws the map. And believe me, in 18th century India, the fallout from that was, wow, just spectacular.
I mean, for centuries, the Mughals were the power on the subcontinent. They ran the whole show. But then, come the early 1700s, everything started to fall apart. And this collapse, it wasn't just a quiet power vacuum. Oh no. It was more like kicking a hornet's nest. It unleashed this massive storm of ambition and conflict, and it totally set the stage for a brand new cast of characters to jump in.
And that, of course, brings us to the main event. Who were these new players? As the Mughal grip loosened, you had all these new rulers and new states popping up, all scrambling for their own piece of the imperial pie. But here's the thing you gotta understand. They weren't all the same. Not by a long shot. They came about in totally different ways.
Yeah, to make sense of it all, historians basically break these new powers down into three main buckets. First up, you've got the successor states. These were pretty much just old Mughal provinces whose governors said, you know what, we're in charge now. Then you have the new states, and these were the rebels, the ones born out of a direct fight against the Mughals. And last but not least, the independent kingdoms. These were the opportunists, the ones who saw the chaos and carved out their own territory.
And this table here lays it out perfectly, right? You've got the successor states, think Bengal, Awadh, Hyderabad. These were basically old Mughal areas that went rogue under their old governors. Then the new states, and the big one here, the one everyone thinks of, is the Maratha Confederacy. They were the insurgents. And finally, the independent kingdoms, like Mysore, who took advantage of the whole mess to build a serious military powerhouse. These were the new heavy hitters on the block.
Okay, but it's really important to get this straight. This period wasn't just mindless, bloody chaos. Not at all. These new states were actually pretty sophisticated. These weren't just random warlords running around. No, these were serious state builders, really trying to create a new, stable order from what was left of the old empire. And honestly, in a lot of ways, they were surprisingly good at it. They didn't just throw everything out. They were smart. They kept a lot of the old Mughal administrative systems, for stuff like taxes, because, well, it worked. They brought in law and order, which meant trade could flourish, both at home and abroad. And here's a really clever bit. Most of them still gave a nod to the Mughal emperor, treating him as a symbolic head. This was a genius move, really, because it made their own rules seem more legit. They were building something that was actually working. But, and this is a huge but, for all their successes, this whole new political setup was built on some seriously shaky ground. There were these deep hidden cracks in the foundation, weaknesses that, in the end, would be totally fatal to their independence. And this comparison here really gets to the heart of the problem. It's like for every single strength they had, there was an equal, crippling weakness. So they had law and order inside their borders, great, but they were constantly at war with their neighbors. They had viable economies, okay, but they couldn't fix a massive financial crisis that was brewing under the surface. They were so focused on building up their own regional power that they just couldn't see the bigger picture. And that brings us to what was probably their biggest, most fatal flaw. They just could not stop fighting each other. I mean, look at this timeline. The whole 18th century was basically one long story of non-stop war. The Marathas fought Mysore, then Mysore fought Hyderabad. It just went on and on. All of this fighting just bled them dry, wasted their money and manpower. But even worse, it meant they could never, ever team up against a common enemy from the outside. And while all that was happening on the battlefield, they had this ticking economic time bomb at home called the Jagirdari crisis. The problem was actually pretty simple, but it was deadly. You see, the amount of money coming from agriculture was staying flat or even going down. But at the same time, the number of nobles, the Jagirdars, who all needed land grants to support their fancy lifestyles, was going way, way up. The math just didn't work. There wasn't enough money to go around, which created massive instability and put a brutal squeeze on the peasants at the bottom. So when you put all these pieces together, the final picture becomes pretty clear, doesn't it?
These states were just too focused on their own little corners of the world. They fell behind on science and technology, they couldn't fix that fundamental economic mess, and most importantly, they just failed to see the big picture that was unfolding beyond their own petty squabbles. Their vision was just too narrow, and that was about to have some terrible consequences. You see, all of these problems, the endless wars, the broken economy, the total lack of unity, it all created the perfect opportunity for someone else. These Indian powers were so busy looking at each other, so focused on their immediate rivals, that they completely missed the real threat creeping in from the outside until it was way, way too late. They basically, without even realizing it, rolled out the welcome mat. And here's the biggest irony in this whole story, the real tragedy of 18th century India. If you think about it, the combined power of these new states, Bengal, the Marathas, Mysore, all of them together, was absolutely strong enough to tear down the old Mughal Empire.
But they were just too divided to ever build a new one in its place. Which leaves us with one last and pretty chilling question to think about. This whole century of fighting weakened everybody. So, did these powerful new Indian states, in their endless fight to be number one, actually just open the front door for the British? Did they pave the way for a foreign company to come in and not just pick up the pieces of the Mughal Empire, but to pick up the pieces of their own kingdoms too?